up, Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and I'm back with another episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. Joining me from Chicago, the Cavs beat reporter, Chris Fedor. This is a team that is 11-0, the 12th team in NBA history to meet this mark. Obviously, Chris, this is the best start to a season since the Warriors started 24-0. Chris, let's just get right into it, right? The Cavs have some notable but kind of favorable matchups coming up, albeit on the road, albeit some maybe back-to-backs, whatever it may be. When do the Cavs lose? Because for me, realistically speaking, it might take until they play the Celtics. And for those who don't know, that would make the Cavs 15-0. But Chris, I want to pick your brain. When do you think the Cavs might face their next biggest challenge, earning them their first loss of the season?
Well, the schedule coming up is relatively favorable, but that Philly game is one that I have circled just because Joel Embiid is supposed to be back for that one. Philly's not playing well right now. They're not. Paul George is still getting acclimated. He's on a minute restriction. They barely squeaked by Charlotte in overtime, and Charlotte was playing dudes that I've never heard of. And I cover this league for a living. So they barely squeaked by, but when Embiid plays, there's just a different vibe around the 76ers, even if they're not going to have Tyrese Maxey for that game. So you can look at that one. You know, Chicago's interesting. They are, because stylistically, they want to do a lot of the same things that the Cavs want to do. And I feel like it's going to be a high-paced game, a whole lot of possessions. Chicago just ended its losing streak recently. Zach LaVine just came back. I don't think they have enough firepower to keep up with the Cavs, especially if the Cavs are going to defend the way that they did in the fourth quarter against Brooklyn. But, like, Chicago, the style that they play, theoretically, they can go score 125 to 130. Especially if Zach LaVine is going to play. I like the addition of Giddey. You know, Vucevic is a bull down low. I don't think the Cavs are going to lose the game, but you never want to dismiss a team, especially an NBA team, and when it's on the road and it's at the start of a road trip. So I think stylistically, Chicago can be interesting because if things go well for them and Kobe White bangs a bunch of threes and Zach LaVine bangs a bunch of threes, they can be an interesting, formidable team from that standpoint where they can put up enough points, which is what's usually going to be required against a team like the Cavs. But to me, the one that stands out beyond those two, and I'm kind of like having to convince myself that Philly can have a shot, but it's Embiid and he's an MVP candidate. And we've seen him change series. We've seen him change games. He is a singular force that can do those kinds of things. But beyond that, I mean, the one that stands out is obviously Boston. There's actually two coming up against the Celtics, very close together. And the Celtics just got Jaylen Brown back. So Boston, to me, would be the team to look at. And the Cavs would have to play them twice within the span of however many weeks it's going to be to even come close to that 24 mark of the Golden State Warriors.
Right. And for me, you mentioned the 76ers, right? And obviously that's going to be a difficult matchup with Paul George, but it is on the second game of a back-to-back for Philly. And we've talked in the past about how Joel Embiid is going to be either questionable or just simply not play in most of the back-to-backs for the remainder of his career to be able to get to the postseason. Not to mention he will just be coming back from an injury. One. Two, we kind of saw the same thing with Ben Simmons, who was out with injury management for his back against the Cavs, who played Brooklyn just a couple nights ago. So I understand what you're saying. And if Joel Embiid plays, 100%. that is a difficult task. But for me, outside of Boston, and you mentioned Chicago, the Chicago Bulls getting to play the Cavs 2 times in the span of their next 3 games, that's the most beneficial thing that you can have when you're playing a team that's on a roll. You get to see them
Mm-hmm.
multiple times. You get to think about if they lose in tomorrow's matchup on Monday and see what they were not able to do in their first game. They get to come back again on Friday and say, all right, let's do it again, this time at Rocket Mortgage Fieldhouse, which would make things a lot more difficult.
So the other thing is, and I've already started looking way, way, way ahead because the number to watch obviously is 24-25. So the Cavs are at 11 right now, 13 more to tie, 14 to set the record. In order to do that, Boston twice, Denver, the Cavs would have to beat Denver too, based on my math on that one. In Miami, yeah, Miami would be the 25th one if they get that far. And that's in Miami. And that's the second game of a back-to-back. And the South Beach flu is a real thing, especially for this Cavs team that has not had very much success in South Beach over the last, half decade? 10 years, if you want to expand it that far. So in order to get to that mark, the record setter, Miami would be the 25th game, right? 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. Yeah, Miami would be the 25th game. That would be wild.
Good math. Good math.
And
I mean, yeah, we understand how difficult it is to go into Miami and be able to beat the Heat, right? That is something that the Cavs have struggled with specifically, but they also struggled with playing against the New York Knicks at Madison Square Garden for multiple seasons. And obviously, again, grain of salt early in the season.
They should have lost that game, by the way.
I agree with you. And their major pieces didn't play well in that game, right? When you talk about the Knicks. So do the Heat have a better outing? Do the Heat have a better scout on the new look Cavs than the Knicks did in the first week of the season, right? All of these things come into an account. But right now, this team, the Cavs, are the team to beat. Darius Garland said it after last night's game. We are no longer the hunters. We are the hunted. Everybody has that game on their schedule trying to give them their first loss of the season. Mm-hmm. It's a bullseye on their back. And to me, it's felt like this Cavs team has not only, albeit talking about a team that has struggled when it comes to the middle quarters for a majority of the season already, they can start a game fast and end the game the way that they need to, right? And that kind of talks about the pace that Kenny Atkinson came into the season wanting to do. The 3-speed style, Chris, talking about going Autobahn, as he calls it, then the neighborhood, then the parallel parking, right? And the Cavs, especially alongside Darius Garland, who has been their best clutch performer in the last 5 minutes, game within 5 points. He's had 18 minutes played, 24 points on 9 of 12 shooting, 3 of 5 from 3, 3 rebounds, 4 assists, and the Cavs are plus 26 with him on the floor. Obviously, you saw it against Brooklyn. Obviously, you also saw it against Milwaukee earlier into the season. This is a team that is no longer like panicking when it comes to the last couple minutes of the game. They now feel confident, and it's a big part of Kenny Atkinson trying everything depending on what is going right and what is going wrong. We came into the season saying this, Chris. If Kenny Atkinson can make better in-game adjustments than J.U. Bickerstaff did last season, this could be a different team, and it's looked like that to start the year.
Well, I think the big thing that stands out to me when talking about the Brooklyn game the other night, for the final 21 minutes, it was not Jarrett and Evan together. And I think Kenny has talked since he got here, Ethan, about wanting those guys to be on the floor together and seeing a value to both those guys being on the floor together. And there is, and it comes on the defensive end of the floor. And not every matchup is going to be the same as Brooklyn. Not every team is going to be the same as Brooklyn. But the other night against the Nets, it was important to me that from their standpoint, they were able to defend at a high enough level for an extended stretch without Jared Allen and Evan Mobley together, with Caris LeVert playing the power forward spot. So if they're going to be able to be a high-level defensive team with only one of those guys on the floor, and they're going to be able to space it out offensively, and they're going to be able to play more up-tempo, and they're going to be able to spread defenses out, and they're going to be able to be the offense that we saw them be over a majority of the second half against Brooklyn. Like, that is a big deal for the Cavs because, the benefit for the Cavs with Jared and Evan together is what they are defensively and what that means for the Cavs defensively. And nobody can argue that because we've seen it over the last 3 years. We've seen it at the beginning of this year. But if they can defend at a high enough level where they don't feel the impact of only one of those guys on the floor, and they're defending to a similar level as what it looks like when both of them are on the floor, I mean, that is big time for this team because we all know that they are significantly different offensively when those two guys aren't on the floor together. And you saw that. You saw that late in the game against Brooklyn. You saw the amount of space that Darius Garland had to work with. You saw the amount of space that Ty Jerome had to work with. Like, defenders didn't want to leave any of those players at all. And it basically turned into either I'm going to beat you off the dribble or I'm going to use a screen and rescreen. I'm going to swing the ball, drive and kick, whatever the case may be. It's just like the offense looked in so much rhythm. It looked so fluid, especially late in the game. And I think part of that is the lineup that they were willing to use. And the other thing that we've talked about, Ethan, is matchups are going to be different and teams are going to be different. So you're going to have to do different things to win games. Sometimes you have to win fast. Sometimes you have to win slow. Sometimes you have to win inside. Sometimes you have to win outside. Sometimes you have to win big. Sometimes you have to win small. And I think through these first 11 games, the Cavs have shown an ability to thrive with a bunch of different lineups. And they've shown the ability to be successful playing a bunch of different styles. And that's really, really important for the big picture.
And Chris, this isn't the bash on Jared Allen. There are going to be games, and we've seen it already this season. There have been games where Donovan Mitchell hasn't been good. There have been games where Darius Garland hasn't been good. And there are going to be games where Jared Allen is not as effective. And this goes back to what I was saying at the beginning, what you touched on as well, being able to make adjustments. That was a lineup that Kenny Atkinson threw out there that has never played together this season.
Right.
Never, right? You had Donovan, Darius, Ty Jerome, Caris LeVert, and Evan Mobley. Right. That's a lineup that has 4 different players that have always been considered either undersized at those positions. Like, Ty Jerome is not a small forward. Caris LeVert isn't a power forward. Caris LeVert said after the game, I haven't played power forward since I was in high school, right? So being able to trust in that and know that those guys are going to get after it on the defensive end, you cannot do that if Ty Jerome doesn't have the back-to-back possessions on the defensive end, the stops that he had. Dennis Schroeder forcing him into a shot clock violation. Then you had him getting a steal on a possession where he was going one-on-one. And then Caris LeVert, man, we talk about what he's been able to do on the offensive end. But Caris LeVert, when it comes to lowest opponent field goal percentage as the primary defender this season, minimum 75 field goals defended, it goes Alex Caruso, 27.2%, Caris LeVert, 32%, right? It is insane to think about what Caris LeVert has been doing. And I got a couple emails, a couple text messages about my article about Ty Jerome and how I said Caris LeVert hounding opposing offensive players. And I was like, look at the stats.
Yeah.
Look at the film. Like, he has been so impactful on both ends of the floor. And now you come back to the conversation we were having last year. Like, who's in the 6-man running for the Cavs, and is it two different players when you talk about Ty Jerome and you talk about Caris LeVert? But Chris, that also comes from the trust in Jarrett Allen and Kenny Atkinson, something that has been delved into between them two, and being able to know that, like, you're not having a great game. This isn't between like a personal thing. We got to win the game, so I'm not going to play you the entire fourth quarter because I simply can't. Instead, Kenny decided to go with a lineup to give Evan Mobley a 2-minute breather that had Dean Wade at the 5. Like, that's something that you don't see. Something that you don't see without the trust that has been built between not only the coaching staff, but also the players in their first season together. Obviously a little bit different with Jarrett Allen, Caris LeVert, and Kenny Atkinson.
And it just speaks to Jarrett. He's a low-maintenance, high-character guy. And everything that the Cavs have talked about is, yes, they're trying to build a specific kind of team. Yes, they're looking for a specific skill set. But they trade for people. They sign people. And the people are the ones that are going to build the chemistry. The people are the ones that are going to help set the culture. The people are going to be the ones that are going to fit in the locker room and on the floor. And, Jarrett is totally okay with whatever role is going to be required of him for this team to win. And those are the kinds of people that you want in that locker room. And this is the kind of team where you're going to have to sacrifice. This is the kind of team where you're going to have to be selfless. This is the kind of team where sometimes you're going to finish games and other times you're not. Like, there are going to be times, Ethan, where Caris LeVert's going to finish games. And then there are going to be other times where he's not going to finish games. And an acceptance of that role, it's something that Steve Kerr talked about a couple games ago. When he was asked what stands out about the Cavs, and he was like, everybody is buying into their roles. Everybody is accepting their roles. Everybody has a clearly defined role. But baked into that is, Kenny's going to go with the best lineup that he considers at that point in the game. And everybody's going to have to be on board with that. And when you're winning and when you have title aspirations, it's a lot easier to be on board with that. And if you have the right people in the locker room that aren't going to chirp about playing time, that aren't going to grumble about not playing in the fourth quarter, that aren't going to grumble about, the number of shots that they get throughout the course of a game, that makes it easier for somebody like Kenny Atkinson to make these kinds of delicate decisions, because they are delicate decisions, because these are professional athletes, and everybody in that locker room has an ego. But they have set it aside for the betterment of this team because they understand that something special is brewing, and they have a legitimate shot to do something special this year if they all buy into that.
Two things that really stand out when it comes to that, Chris, right? Like, the two things that allow Kenny Atkinson to do that. One, winning ball games. Like, if you keep winning, that the discussions are gonna be much easier. Like, sorry you didn't play, we got the win. You gonna be mad that you didn't play, or you gonna be mad that we got the win? Figure it out. Two, the camaraderie and consistency, the continuity of this team, right? Like, they've talked about it. Tristan Thompson talked about it. They have tough conversations. They have true conversations. They have real conversations with one another. And it's not, obviously, everybody does have an ego. You're absolutely right. But this is a team that has played with each other now for 3 years with Donovan Mitchell as a part of the core four. And it's not about how many stats, how many points, how many assists everybody can get. It's what can you bring in every given scenario. And that kind of gets into a topic that I, again, feel like will become its own podcast. But there's a decision on the horizon, Chris, about the small forward position, and that will be its own podcast. right? You have Isaac Okoro playing as a mismatch guard on the perimeter, but also being at the small forward position. He started in the last couple of games, obviously with Dean Wade either out or recovering from illness. Then you
Mm,
still have Max Strus, who is on the come up and coming back from an ankle injury at some point. What level will he come back at? All those different things will need to be answered.
mm,
But Chris, when you have Dean Wade and Isaac Okoro right now, right? And Kenny Atkinson has talked about this, and this is going to be my last question of the night. He's talked about going matchup base.
yeah.
I feel like, and we've talked about, that it is easier to have a set lineup. But with Dean Wade coming back from an illness, do you feel like it was more of a decision matchup based or conditioning wise? Or do you feel like Dean Wade will return to being the starter for this team?
I think it was a case where Isaac Okoro was playing so well that Kenny Atkinson wanted to continue to reward him for playing at that level. I think Isaac was fitting so well with that particular starting group and the defense that he was bringing. He wanted to reward that. He wanted to reward his rebounding. He wanted to reward his sacrifice. And I think sometimes as a coach, you just ride the hot hand, especially when you have what you believe are comparable options to go to, right? Like, I don't think Dean Wade is a clear cut better option than Isaac Okoro. If Isaac's going to give the kind of offensive boost that he has recently, if he's going to give the kind of shooting that he did during the stretch that Dean Wade wasn't out there. You know what I mean? And I don't think Dean was playing so well at the beginning of the year, and the lineups with Dean were playing so well at the beginning of the year that you were like, it was a guarantee that he was going to go back into that starting lineup. So I think it's a situation where Kenny's going to continue to look at all the data. He's going to continue to look at matchups. He's going to continue to look at how the players are performing, either in those lineups or just throughout the course of games. And he's going to make the decision that he feels like is best. I think it's going to continue to be fluid while the Cavs are working through the non-Max Strus portion of this schedule. And then, depending on how Isaac is playing, or depending on how Dean Wade is playing, and depending on how the team is playing, then Kenny's going to have to decide if it makes the most sense to put Max in the starting lineup, which is what they were planning to do coming into this year, which is what they did all training camp, basically, what they did going into the preseason. Or is he going to stick with one of Dean or Isaac? And I think part of that decision, Ethan, is going to be about how those guys individually are playing and how them individually playing is impacting the Cavs.
And Chris, obviously, looking at some of the numbers, right? Because they're important to us. Obviously, still a small sample size, right? But when Dean Wade is on the court for the Cavs, they have an offensive rating of 114.1.
Mm-hmm.
When he's off the court, they have an offensive rating of 123.8. That's nearly a 10-point jump, right?
Yep.
The Cavs overall have the best offensive rating in the entire NBA at 122. So when he's off the court, the Cavs have a better offensive rating overall than when he is, and not to mention when he's off the court, right?
Right.
Isaac Okoro, when you talk about him in these conversations, it's then the on-court rating being 125.3, which is better than their overall offensive rating. When he's off the court, the Cavs have an offensive rating of 118.2. Obviously, we understand that Isaac Okoro didn't have the best shooting night against the Brooklyn Nets, right? Dean Wade has also been out with illness and been coming back and trying to figure out his shot, and was short the last and his shots were short against Brooklyn, clearly because he was still trying to work on his conditioning, and he didn't have the same lift as he has in the past. So this is a difficult conversation, especially with what we have going on with Dean coming back from an injury, Max Strus being out, Isaac Okoro being healthy. Do you think Isaac Okoro starts against the Chicago Bulls?
I do. I still think they continue to go with it because, like you said, the defense between Dean and Isaac very, very comparable. I do think Dean has shown himself to be one of the best isolation defenders in the NBA, one of the most impactful defenders in the NBA. It's only 11 games into the season at this point, Ethan, but I reference it a lot. Estimated plus minus, defensive estimated plus minus on dunks and threes. Dean is in the 99th percentile as a defender so far this year. So his defense speaks for itself. When he's out there, the Cavs perform like the best defense in the NBA. When he's off the floor, they are a little bit more generous, and that's to be expected because that's basically where he has made his mark the last couple of years. It's how he's found his niche in the NBA. But if the defense is going to be comparable, I mean, the numbers are pretty telling when it comes to how the Cavs function offensively when Isaac is in there versus Dean at this point, just based on the way that the two guys have played early on in the season and the way that the team has played early on in the season. So I think it's going to be Isaac. I do. I don't think he's done anything poorly, and I don't think that, as I said, I don't think Dean was playing well enough to just say, we're going to slide you right back in there when your conditioning is where it is, when you're off of a minute restriction. So I think Isaac, the way that he has played in the absence of Dean, or while Dean was still getting his conditioning up and his minute workload back up, I think the way that Isaac has played, he's earned another look for as long as he continues to play well. At the same time, I think the real conversation comes when Max is ready to go. And Kenny Atkinson even admitted the other night, Ethan, he doesn't know exactly what he's going to do with that. He feels like it's going to be a difficult decision for him to make. I would go with Max, personally. I think Max is the best player of all the three, and I think this offense is tailor-made for Max Strus. I have been really, really excited. The Cavs have been really, really excited just to see what it looks like with somebody like Max. When you think about his game stylistically and you think about this offense, it's almost a perfect marriage. There's so much continuous movement. There's so much spacing, playing up tempo, drive and kick, swing, 3-point heavy, cutting. All of that is what Max does well. And I still believe, even though the Cavs have gotten by without Max, and that's a credit to Dean, that's a credit to Isaac, that's a credit to the rest of their teammates, I still believe that the Cavs need the skill set of Max Strus to complement those other four in that starting lineup the best.
And Chris, I mean, that's going to be another conversation. I keep saying this. I feel like we end the podcast this way almost every time now. It is Saturday was 3 weeks into the 6-week period before Max Strus's reevaluation, right?
Yeah.
So there's still some time on the clock. There's still about half of the games left until he's reevaluated. It should be at the 20-game mark around there. So Isaac Okoro and Dean Wade could show themselves a little bit more. That's why we're going to have this conversation again down the road. But I wanted to touch on, before we get out of here, on Dean Wade's numbers defensively. You mentioned, and Jared Allen has said almost 3 different times in his interviews, that Dean Wade is one of the best isolation defenders in the NBA. But when you talk about on-off numbers on the defensive end, obviously the Cavs are the 9th ranked team 11 games into the season in defensive rating, 109.9. When Dean Wade is on the floor, the Cavs have a defensive rating of 103.4. That's nearly 6 points less than what their overall rating is. There's only 2 players on the floor that have a better defensive rating during that period, which is Caris LeVert, who we talked about earlier in this podcast. He's number 1 at 101.1, which is nasty. And then Donovan Mitchell, 103.3. When the Cavs have Dean Wade off the court, their defensive rating is the third highest on the team, which is a 111.8, right?
Mm,
And that's completely different from what they want it to be. And it's near the range of teams like the Detroit Pistons, the Phoenix Suns,
mm,
and even the Miami Heat, right? And this is
mm,
obviously 11 games into the season, but when Dean Wade is on the floor with Evan Mobley, with Jared Allen, there's so much switchability when it comes to the painted area, when it comes to Evan Mobley and Jared Allen still being able to defend on the perimeter just at a different level. It's something to look forward to. When Isaac Okoro is on the floor, it's switching 1 through 3 with Donovan, Darius, Caris, Ty, and what they're able to do at the point of attack as well. So it's two different kind of sample sizes, two different dynamics, but those two guys have been extremely impactful to start the season. It's going to be an interesting conversation. But how are you enjoying your stay? And have you had any deep dish pizza?
dude, I do not mess with deep dish pizza. Are you kidding me? Get that stuff out of here. It's casserole. No. If I'm going to get pizza, it's going to be New York style. It's going to be coal oven. And they do have a place here, actually, very close to my hotel. I'm staying very close to Magnificent Mile. Um, it's called Italy. There's one in New York as well, but there's one here in Chicago, and they do have New York style pizza. I was going to get it tonight, but I had pizza yesterday at home, so I decided to get some bolognese instead, which was really, really good. So if you're in the Chicago area, anybody that's listening to this, check out Italy. I know it's not like the most unique place that I could suggest, the most local place that I could suggest, but I love food. I love to eat, and it's really, really good. But deep dish pizza is horrendous. Like, I don't know how people can eat that stuff and enjoy that stuff. You need a knife and a fork. No, it's basically a casserole or like a lasagna, but in pizza form. No, thank you. I do not mess with that stuff.
Good to know. I already knew it. I just wanted the listeners to know where you stood because I know you have a very strong feeling about your pizza, and the fact that you even considered having pizza 2 nights in a row already should tell everybody what they need to know, right? But Cavs, but Chris, this is a Cavs podcast. This is not a food podcast. As much as I feel like we would tear that up, but
Should we start a food podcast? Is that what you're saying?
I talked about this with Jimmy during the off season. Like he's a big music guy, you're a big food guy. Like
Yeah.
when he gets back on the pod more often, I was like, should we do a music Monday and a foodie Friday? Like, interesting type of beats, but
So another thing that happened here, before I left for Chicago, I was trying to do a whole bunch of laundry, and for some reason, my dryer just wasn't behaving the way that I needed it to. So by the time it was time for me to walk out the door, I had everything in my suitcase packed, and this is the longest trip that we've made so far this year for the Cavs. So I've actually brought my checked baggage. Every other one has been a carry-on. So by the time I was ready to leave and my Uber was coming to my house, I had everything packed. I was ready to go. Shoes, clothes, puffer vests because it's going to be chilly weather and I wear those all the time. Um, I didn't have any socks. They were all in the dryer. And I knew this. Like, I was planning it up, and all of my long socks, they were in the dryer. And I thought they would be done by the time that I left because I felt like I gave myself ample time to get everything done that I needed to get done. No, they were soaked still. And it's not a situation where I could have just like shoved them in the suitcase and then hung them on the heater in my room, which is something that I've done before, by the way. You have to improvise in this world. They were just too soaked to do that. and I didn't want to get everything else in my suitcase soaked. So I went to CVS. Target was closed by the time I was done with dinner. Marshall's, which is very close by me, was closed by the time I was done with dinner. I went to CVS. I didn't know what to expect. I wasn't going there for anything except for chapstick and some Coke Zero because Marriott properties are Pepsi. Thumbs down to that. All Coke all the time. So I went in there to get a Coke Zero and some chapstick. And I just was kind of walking around CVS and I was like, you know what? Wonder if they have socks. They do not have men's socks. So I bought a pair of women's socks to hold me over.
Come on.
Until Marshall's and Target opens up tomorrow. I needed a pair of socks for tonight. The ones that I had were dirty. They were all sweaty. They were all airplaney. So I am the only person, I think, in this world who is currently wearing women's socks. And at the bottom of the sock thing, you know how they have the label on them? It is bright pink. So I'm going to bring these things home in about a week from now. I'm going to throw them in the wash, throw them in the dryer, and Holly's going to be like, what the hell are these?
You got to trash
Where
them.
did these women's socks come from? Yes.
Trash
It was only one pair, though. Like, they had a 3-pack. I considered it the 3-pack. I did not get it. It was only one pair because they don't fit properly. They're for shoe sizes 5 to 9, and I wear 11 and a half or 12. So that's not going to work for me, but I just needed something in a pinch.
And I know our listeners are going to be like, this is the Cavs podcast.
It's okay.
These are my favorite moments of recording this stuff. Like, I love talking hoops. I love getting into the nitty gritty of the stats, getting nerdy with Chris on this podcast. But come on, man. Like, you telling me, like, last season it was, and when you said you went to CVS, I immediately was like, he's going to get a toothbrush. He's like, because the downstairs didn't have the stuff that he needed. They didn't have the dental kit or what he had explained that he had gotten last season. This year, you're wearing women's socks. Like, dog, you're inside. You have control of the heat. Turn the heat up. Like,
oh man, I'm not gonna walk around barefoot. That's not happening. I need some kind of socks to get me through the night, and I wasn't gonna wear my airplaney socks. They're all germy and stuff.
Wait,
all sweaty.
Do you wear socks to bed, Chris?
No, not to bed.
Okay, I had to check.
But walking around my hotel room, I wear socks. Although they did upgrade me, so I'm in this fancy suite. That's really, really nice.
So again, when
I'm notorious, though. Like, this is true. I am notorious for forgetting random things on road trips. You think that I'd have this down? I've been doing this for 11 years at this point. But I mean, it seems like every single city that I've gone into, I've had to buy something random, and I come back and I only use it like once or twice while I'm on the road. And then it just kind of gets shoved in my closet. I have this hoodie that I had to buy last year from one of the locations because it started to rain and I wasn't prepared for the rain. It was not on the weather app whatsoever. So I bought this hoodie that I've worn one time. I went into a Western outlet store in the heart of Oklahoma City in the stockyards where they got all these big belt buckles and everything like that. And like, they don't sell, $10 belts in the heart of Oklahoma City in the stockyards, right? Those things are genuine leather and they're like $50. The cheapest one that they have is like $50. And I've got so many belts at home. And my wife was like, you just spent $50 on a belt when you have 6 of them hanging in your closet. Another trip, I forgot underwear. Yeah. So, at some point, maybe in year 15 or year 20, however long I do this for, it's not going to be year 20. Oh my God, no way. However long I do this for, maybe I'll have the hang of this whole packing for road trips thing.
Man, because if y'all don't know, like, me and Chris try and coordinate these podcasts, and sometimes, like, I'll go solo so he can have a night to be with his family, of course, but also to pack. And to then hear that he keeps forgetting stuff, that come on, man. Like, what's going on, Chris?
To my defense, this wasn't forgetting something. This was miscalculating how long it was going to take for all of my socks to dry.
This time.
Yes, this time.
All right. Enough fun, enough joy, right? Other than what the Cavs are going through, but
if I was flexible enough too, like I would show all of the viewers on YouTube, but I cannot get my foot up that high, and we're not going to go Rex Ryan on this podcast.
No feet pics for free, Chris. That's what I've been told.
That's right. That's right.
But Chris, with all that being said, that'll wrap up today's episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. But remember to become a Cavs Insider and interact with Chris, me, and Jimmy by subscribing to Subtext. Sign up for a 14-day free trial or visit cleveland.com/Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word STOP. It's easy, but we can tell you, the people who sign up stick around because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from me, Chris, and Jimmy. This isn't just our podcast. It's your podcast. And the only way to have your voice heard is through Subtext. Y'all be safe. We out.